You know, when the Las Vegas Raiders schedule initially had dropped months back, right before the season even begun, we kind of started to get the teams that we're going to play. We got the exact schedule. One of the games that I was really excited for was this Monday Night Football game coming up against the Atlanta Falcons. I said this is going to be a game where, it'll be a winnable game for the Raiders. The Raiders might be in, contention for the playoffs, potentially, depending on how the offensive coordinator kind of does, at least coming into the season. And the Raiders are in a completely different spot now, right? They're in the spot where this game does not matter for the Raiders. On top of that, if you really consider this game here coming up against the Falcons, it's a home game on Monday Night Football, but 50% of the seats have been sold to Falcons fans. And that's probably not considering the fact that there's a lot of, tickets that sell in the secondary market and those type of things. Um, I think the Raiders are in an interesting spot as we kind of go forward. And we're going to preview the Falcons game, right? Because we might actually see the Falcons make a quarterback change in the middle of this game, maybe even right before the game actually begins. Michael Penix Jr., who the Raiders really, really wanted, could ultimately make that start for the Falcons at this point. But before we get into that, I want to just talk a little bit about some of the Raiders players that are coming back from injury. So Nate Hobs has been practicing for the Raiders this week. So if you guys remember, Hobbs had an injury that's kind of kept him out for the last 3 to 4 weeks. The guy has not been healthy, and I would make the argument it has really impacted this defense. But even though the defense has still been able to have success, it has hindered this defense. And Nate Hobbs is one of those guys that's a very, very good slot defender, right? You put that guy in the slot, he can tackle, he can cover tight ends, he's big, he's strong for a defensive back specifically. And the Raiders are actually going to get this guy back today. Antonio Pierce said that he anticipates Nate Hobbs starting against Falcons this Monday. And this is great news for the Raiders, right? You want your best players out there healthy. You want these guys to be able to play. And keep in mind, Nate Hobbs is in a contract year for the Raiders. So if Nate Hobbs, continues to play where we've kind of seen him play over the course of his career, this guy could get a contract for the Raiders. Now, it'll be a slot defender contract, which is a little bit different than being on the outside as a boundary corner. But regardless of that, I think the Raiders got to bring back Nate Hobbs. And I am happy that he is going to be back for the Raiders, and he will be playing for the Las Vegas Raiders on Monday Night Football. A guy that may or may not play is a guy in Aiden O'Connell. If you guys remember, he was obviously knocked out of the game this past week. The injury was not as bad as we initially thought, but Aiden O'Connell has been practiced, or he has not practiced, but he is wanting to play come Monday Night Football. But from what I'm hearing, he is not playing, right? Something tells me the Raiders are only doing this to make sure the Falcons have to prepare for both quarterbacks, right? You got to get ready for Aiden O'Connell, the guy that plays within the pocket, but at the same time, you got to get ready for the other quarterback in Desmond Ridder, who the Falcons obviously know because they drafted him in the third round a couple years back. And Ritter's a little bit different, right? He's quicker. He's more likely to take off running. He'll run read options, right? So he's one of those guys that you got to prepare for a little bit different than Aiden O'Connell. And I think the Raiders already know Aiden O'Connell is not playing, right? Because he hasn't practiced yesterday. He isn't practicing today. And although AP said he's quote unquote fighting his tail off to get back, he is not going to play. Regardless of that, I still am excited to see what the Raiders kind of do with the quarterbacks as we go into this week. The Raiders actually went out and signed a quarterback as well. So, Aiden O'Connell to me is going to end up being out of this game. He's not going to play. And then the Raiders will have 3 quarterbacks, right? We'll have Desmond Ridder. We'll have Carter Bradley as the number 2. And then we'll have that quarterback we just picked up off of I think it was the Panthers practice squad. And then he'll ultimately end up being the 3rd quarterback in case of an emergency. But it's going to be an interesting game nonetheless. The Falcons are trying to compete for a playoff spot. The Raiders are not in that same spot where they're competing for the playoffs. And that too, the Falcons are a good football team, but they just haven't been able to have success this year. Raheem Morris obviously took over as the Falcons head coach. Arthur Smith was the head coach last year. He got fired. He ended up going to the Steelers. He's their offense coordinator at this point. And Raheem Morris has taken over for the Falcons, and they even went out and hired Zach Robinson as their offensive coordinator. Zach Robinson was the guy I kind of wanted for the Raiders as our offensive coordinator over Luke Getsy. And Robinson hasn't really done that good of a job, in my opinion. The Falcons have a really, really good offensive line. Coming in, they were one of the best offensive lines in the NFL. And Robinson's strategy is different than what that offensive line was built for, right? If you guys know about offensive lines kind of around the NFL, the Falcons have taken this weird approach with their offensive line where they're getting guys that are like 280, 285 pounds across the board, right? From left tackle to right tackle. Those guys are super, super fast, super quick. And over the last 2 to 3 years, they built a really good offensive line that just ran zone plays, and it was very hard to stop because those offensive linemen are so fast. Well, this year, Zach Robinson's come in, right? He was with Sean McVay last year. He was the pass game coordinator for Sean McVay. And he's come in this year. He's gotten that offensive coordinator job. And some people are like, you're trying to throw the ball too much, and that offensive line's not really built to handle that. And now I'm not 100% sure if I agree with that, but that's kind of what people are saying with the Falcons. And that's one of the reasons why they're having not as much success as they should be. Because let's be honest, the Falcons' offense is absolutely stacked. Like across the board, it's such a great offense from the individual players, right? Kyle Pitts, one of the best tight ends, at least physically, he's one of the best tight ends. He hasn't really put it together. You got Drake London, who's a really, really good wide receiver. You even got some guys outside of those two, right, from the pass catchers. You got guys like Darnell Mooney, Ray McLeod. Those guys can make plays, right? They're like the Trey Tuckers of the world, right? Guys that are kind of unknown, but they can make plays. And then on the offensive line, they got a really, really good offensive line. Of course, Lindstrom, right guard's one of the best guards in the NFL. Their tackles and Jake Matthews, a pretty solid player, right? He's a first-round pick, I think, back in like 2015-ish. Matthew Bergeron, second-round pick just last year, one of the best young offensive linemen in the NFL as well. And then you got Bijan Robinson, right? Arguably the best running back in the NFL, right? And then even on the defensive side, you got some players, right? But the Falcons just haven't been able to come together. Now, some people think that's because of Kirk Cousins, and some people think that for this game against the Raiders, there's a chance that Michael Penix Jr. actually ends up taking over, and it'll be interesting to see if that actually happens. I personally would love to see Michael Penix. Maybe it sparks something for the Falcons, maybe it doesn't, but that's a quarterback that I've kind of been wanting to see actually have some live snaps. I know he played, I think, in a game earlier where they got kind of blown out, but this might be the game, right? So even though the Falcons might have to get ready for Aiden O'Connell, the Raiders also have to prepare for Michael Penix potentially coming in, right? Because Penix and Kirk Cousins are two different type of quarterbacks. Penix will come in and he'll start to run around a little bit, right? So for the Raiders, you got to prepare for both Penix as well as Kirk Cousins. Now I want to talk about what the Raiders kind of have to do to ultimately be able to kind of not only win, but like just show success, show progress going into this Falcons game on the offensive side. But before we get into that, I want to just give you guys my picks with Underdog. If you guys have never utilized Underdog before, there's a link down in the comments below. Go check out their platform. They have this really, really awesome game called Pick'em. Essentially, you just make your picks across the NFL, right? You have all the different players, all the different matchups that are kind of coming up. And then you just got to use your football knowledge. Today, we're picking four different picks, essentially. I think all four of these will actually end up hitting. Devon Achane has been one of the best running backs in the NFL. I'm going to take higher that he'll score at least one catching touchdown or one rushing touchdown. Brock Bowers, I think he should have 63.5 yards. I picked higher on that because I think Brock Bowers didn't have as good of a game last week. Obviously, last week the Buccaneers came in and they said we're going to take away Brock Bowers. And Michael Mayer got involved in that, right? But the Falcons played defense a little bit different. So I think there's a chance Brock Bowers ends up having a little more success in this week's matchup. Plus, Brock Bowers is kind of that guy that any given play can go for 40 yards, right? And then, of course, we're also getting Alexander Mattison back. So I think there's a chance Madison's going to run in for a touchdown, especially if we have back there Desmond Ridder. I do think Ridder's going to end up starting. I think there's also a chance with that, you're going to be running read options. There's going to be a point in that game where the Raiders are going to get into shotgun. Maybe you're, in the red zone. We're going to call a read option run, and that defensive end is going to have to, stay flat. He's not going to be able to come crashing down. And with that, that can open up some lanes, and Alexander Madison's a pretty good running back. I think he's going to come in. He's hungry as well, right? He kind of lost that starting job a little bit to Sincere McCormick. I think there's a good chance he's going to be able to score a rushing touchdown. And then, of course, if you guys look at this pick, it's a $10 entry. The payout's $935. The reason why the payout's so high is because we're doing one pick here, which is going to be the quarterback for the New Orleans Saints, and Jake Haener. We're doing a pick where I think this guy is going to be able to have one rushing touchdown. Now, keep in mind, we've never seen this guy really play. I think he played one game in the past. This is his first official start. And if there's one thing that happens when you kind of first go out there is, one, the speed of the game is going to be a lot faster for you. On top of that, you're going to kind of make your reads, make your cues, get a little confused, and maybe you take off running as a rookie quarterback. So I think there's a chance that in this game, the Saints are going to be, within the red zone area, maybe in the plus territory. I think there's a chance this guy's going to take off running on one of these plays. Also, keep in mind, Dan Quinn loves to blitz. He loves to utilize cover one, cover three, those type of concepts with one safety deep, which means that Jake Haener may get a lot of man coverage looks, and man coverage is generally when you're able to kind of take off running. So we'll see what ends up happening. But because I threw that pick in there, now keep in mind, there's probably a higher chance it's not going to happen. But because of that, the pick is the payout's a lot higher, right? So we're going to go with that one. If you guys want to make your own picks, there's going to be a link down in the comments below. It supports the channel. So go click that link, go sign up to Underdog, make your own picks, and then make sure you guys tag me on Twitter. Some of you guys have started to tag me over the last couple of weeks, and I DM'd some of you guys, so we've kind of went back and forth. And one guy specifically told me about a strategy he uses, and although I'm not going to pull that strategy up, maybe next week I'll share it with you guys. It definitely makes sense to me, and I agree with it, and I've utilized it, and we'll see if it works out this week. And then let's wrap this video up a little bit, man. Let's finish this video. Let's talk a little bit about the Raiders on the offensive side and kind of what I want to see as we go forward. I really want to watch Carter Bradley play, and I don't think this is going to be the week for Bradley. Truth be told, if Aiden O'Connell can't go this week, which I think is what we're trending towards already, I think there's a real chance that Desmond Ritter's going to come in this week, and he's going to be fired up, right? Desmond Ritter's playing against the team that ultimately drafted him, gave him a year to kind of show what they had before they ultimately replaced him. I think there's a real chance that Desmond Ritter's going to come in and be fired up. But in the event that Desmond Ridder goes down, right, in the event that this guy ends up getting hurt, and then maybe Carter Bradley has to come in, and then maybe Carter Bradley starts the rest of the season, I think that's actually a positive for the Raiders. I think that's kind of what you want to see, right? Not necessarily Ridder getting hurt, but Carter Bradley getting some opportunities to play a little bit. There was a time when the 49ers had Trey Lance, and Trey Lance did not work out for him, right? And they already knew that, okay, we're going to write this guy off a little bit. He's not the future of this team. And then they went from Trey Lance, and they made that switch over to Jimmy G, right? They went back to Jimmy G, and they already knew Jimmy G's not the guy. But then they had the 7th-round rookie quarterback in Brock Purdy, who started the final 5 or 6 games for the 49ers, and he looked really, really, really good. And these guys then at that point realized that this rookie quarterback is the future, right? He's the guy for us. Now, I don't know if Brock Purdy long-term's the guy, but the guy looks good right now. And he is their quarterback right now. So there's nothing that says Carter Bradley couldn't also be that guy for the Raiders. We've seen what this guy could do in the preseason. I want to see what this guy can do as we go forward. Now, this might not be the week he starts, but keep an eye out for Carter Bradley to eventually play down the line. Even if it's just a couple of snaps, a couple of drives. If Ridder starts and he struggles, right? If we have 0 points or 3 points and we're heading into, the fourth quarter or whatever it is, you got to make that switch. Let's see if someone else can potentially give us a spark a little bit. And then let's figure out what we have with that right tackle in DJ Glaze. This week, we have a pretty good pass rusher in Arnold Ebiketie coming into town. Ebiketie plays for the Atlanta Falcons. To me, he's a good football player. They also got Matthew Judon, who's another good pass rusher. Let's see what the Raiders can do on the offensive line. DJ Glaze specifically needs to prove himself to me. A lot of people have already said that DJ Glaze is the future for the Raiders. People post on Twitter saying that Tom Telesco crushed this draft. He got 3 starters in the first 3 picks. I do think Tom Telesco did a great job with the first 2 picks, but the third one, I'm not 100% sold on, right? I'm not going to say this guy's a superstar player, he's the future, until he proves it, until he proves at least 2 to 3 years against good competition, 5-man protection. He's not getting that chip help. I need to see DJ Glaze show that to me, right? And it starts with games like this where you have good players kind of coming in. We'll also get Grady Jarrett, who's a really good pass rusher. He'll be going up against Jackson Powers Johnson, a loss. That's a matchup to kind of keep an eye on as well. And then let's see if the Raiders can run the football, and let's see if Sincere McCormick can continue to have success. I did a film breakdown on McCormick yesterday where we talked a little bit about some of what he showed us. It was a lot of like duo. A lot of it was like power runs, some counter, but a lot of it wasn't zone, right? So I want to see this guy run more zone concepts and see if he can have success. Usually zone concepts are the big plays that ultimately pop, right? Most of the time, power is kind of boxed in. You can kind of shut it down after like 5, 6, 7 yards. The plays that usually pop are going to be like pin pull, which technically it's power, but it's really zone minus the front side guys. Or if it's not pin pull, it's mostly like outside zone, right? So let's see if Sincere McCormick can have a little bit of success. And then let's see what some of these other guys can kind of do on the defensive side of the football. Last week, Amari Burney had, I think it was a sack. Don't quote me on that. Let's see what this guy can do as well this week. Let's give him some more playing time. Another guy I want to kind of see is the Cameron Richardson, who's played a lot over the last 3 to 4 weeks. Let's see if this guy can continue to get better and improve. You know, I always say this. Patrick Graham runs a really, really good scheme in the secondary. Sometimes it's not about the individual cornerbacks, right? Like Jacorin Bennett's having success with the Raiders. It's not guaranteed that he would go to a different team and also have success, right? For the longest time, the Raiders would bring in corners that would have success on other teams. They bring them to the Raiders, and then they wouldn't be as good with the Raiders, right? And a part of that was because of the fact that sometimes the secondary produces guys, right? Like one coach will produce a really good secondary player, and then another coach can't mimic that because the scheme's, clearly a lot different. Patrick Graham does that with his cornerbacks. Bill Belichick, Dan Quinn, these are guys that also kind of do that in the secondary as well with some of the corners they have. Let me know what you guys think, man. Thumbs up, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time with another video.